My name is Madeline. I am 33 years old, and my husband stood on a stage in front of 200 Silicon Valley elites to auction me off for a $10 bill. He called me his useless wife, who only knew how to burn toast. While the entire ballroom erupted in mocking laughter, I just sat there in silence. I was not crying. I was calculating exactly how many hours it would take to completely dismantle his impending billionaire empire. Then a voice rang out from the back of the room with a bid of $10 million, and my husband's smug smile instantly evaporated. Before I share exactly how I destroyed his life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to quietly endure disrespect while holding the key to your own revenge. The Nexus Corps pre-public offering charity gala was supposed to be the crowning achievement of Preston's career. He was 36 years old and exactly 3 days away from taking his tech company to the stock market. The grand ballroom at the plaza was packed to the brim with venture capitalists, technology executives, and media personnel. Preston had spent the entire evening knocking back expensive scotch, soaking in the adulation and posing for photographs. I was seated at a dark corner table near the kitchen doors wearing a faded burgundy gown I had bought off the rack 5 years ago. Preston had explicitly told me not to embarrass him by mingling with the important guests. Halfway through the charity auction, Preston marched up to the stage and grabbed the microphone from the professional auctioneer. His face was flushed with alcohol and a heavy dose of unearned arrogance. He gestured broadly toward the crowd before pointing directly at my dark table. The lighting technician, eager to please the man of the hour, swung a massive spotlight over to illuminate my outdated dress. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston announced, his voice booming out through the heavy speakers, "we have auctioned off luxury sports cars and private island getaways tonight. But how about something a little more charitable for a good cause? Who wants to bid on my beautiful, absolutely useless wife? She cannot code a single line, she does not understand business, and she burns toast on a regular basis. Bidding starts at $10. Do I hear a 10? A heavy, awkward silence fell over the massive room for a split second before members of Preston's inner circle started chuckling. Encouraged by the sound, the entire ballroom erupted into laughter. Wealthy women in designer dresses whispered behind their hands while looking in my direction. Men in tailored suits shook their heads in amusement, raising their glasses to Preston's cruel joke. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I did not shed a single tear. I simply stared at the man I had married, realizing that the quiet, submissive facade I had maintained for 6 long years was finally reaching its absolute expiration date. "Do I hear $10? Preston asked again, leaning heavily on the wooden podium and flashing a bright, arrogant smile. $10 million. The voice was calm, resonant, and sliced through the laughter like a sharp steel blade. The ballroom went dead silent in an instant. Heads swiveled toward the back doors. Elias stepped out of the shadows and into the light. At 40 years old, he was a self-made technology billionaire and the chief executive officer of the largest rival conglomerate in the valley. Preston had spent the last 3 months desperately trying to secure a simple 5-minute meeting with him. Preston chuckled nervously, tapping the microphone with his finger. "Very funny, Elias. But I think 10 million is a bit steep for a woman who cannot even balance a basic household checkbook." Elias did not smile. He walked slowly down the center aisle, his cold eyes locked on Preston with absolute disdain. "I do not joke about valuations," Preston Elias said, his voice carrying clearly across the room without needing a microphone. "I said $10 million. 10 million to buy her time away from the most insecure, pathetic man in this room." A collective gasp echoed through the elite crowd. Preston's face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He had just been publicly and ruthlessly humiliated by the one man whose approval could dictate the success of his entire public offering. Elias stopped right next to my table, offered me a brief, respectful nod, and walked straight out of the ballroom. He left my husband standing on stage under the bright lights, looking like a complete and utter fool. 15 minutes later, Preston dragged me out the side exit of the hotel by my upper arm. His grip was bruising, his breath reeking of scotch and pure fury. "What is wrong with you?" Preston screamed, pushing me roughly toward the brick wall of the valet parking area. Are you throwing yourself at my competitors now? Are you trying to humiliate me on the biggest night of my entire life? I straightened my posture, adjusted the strap of my cheap handbag, and met his furious gaze. You humiliated yourself, Preston. I did absolutely nothing but sit exactly where you told me to sit. He scoffed, running a frantic hand through his perfectly styled hair. You owe me your life, Madeline. Do not ever forget that. When your stupid little coding startup went bankrupt 6 years ago, I was the one who paid off your pathetic debts. I gave you a roof over your head. You would be begging on the streets if it were not for my generosity. He actually believed his own narrative. He had no idea that I simply let him think he was the hero of my story. Just then, a sleek silver sports car pulled up to the curb. Whitney Preston's 26-year-old executive assistant sat in the passenger seat. She rolled down the window wearing a smirk that perfectly matched my husband's inflated ego. Preston pulled a crumpled $20 bill from his suit pocket and threw it directly at my chest. It fluttered down to the damp pavement. Take a cab home, he spat. I cannot even look at your face right now. He got into the driver's seat and sped off into the night, leaving me standing alone on the curb in my faded dress. I looked down at the $20 bill, feeling a slow, dangerous smile finally break across my face. A moment later, a pristine black Maybach pulled up exactly where Preston's sports car had just been. The tinted rear window rolled down smoothly. Elias was sitting inside the ambient streetlights, catching the sharp, intelligent lines of his face. Is your masquerade finally over? Director Madeline Elias asked quietly. Because Nexus Corp is planning to use your proprietary algorithm to defraud Wall Street tomorrow morning, and I think it is time we pull the plug on your husband's fragile little empire. The black Maybach slid away from the curb, merging silently into the flow of downtown traffic. I stood perfectly still on the damp pavement, the crumpled $20 bill completely forgotten. The cold night air suddenly felt crisp and energizing. Elias Vance had just confirmed what I had been quietly assembling for 6 years. Preston's entire corporate identity, his impending billionaire status, his very sense of self-worth was a house of cards constructed entirely on my intellectual property, and the wind was about to blow. I did not take a cab. I walked the 12 blocks to the nearest luxury hotel, checked in under my maiden name, and slept for 8 solid hours. It was the best night of sleep I had enjoyed since the day I married Preston. The next morning, I returned to the expansive glass-walled mansion Preston insisted on buying to showcase his success. The house was quiet. I walked straight up the floating staircase to the master suite, pulled a single overnight suitcase from the walk-in closet, and began methodically folding my clothes. I only packed what I had purchased before the marriage. Everything else, the designer dresses Preston had selected to make me look like an acceptable corporate accessory, remained untouched on their velvet hangers. I was zipping the suitcase closed when the heavy oak front door downstairs crashed open. The sound echoed violently through the empty house. Madeline Preston's voice boomed from the foyer, thick with residual panic and unearned authority. Get down here right now. I did not rush. I smoothed the wrinkles from my simple gray slacks, adjusted the cuffs of my white blouse, and walked unhurriedly down the stairs. Preston was standing in the center of the kitchen. He was not alone. Flanking him like 2 very expensive, very angry bodyguards were his sister Monica and her husband Terrence. Monica wore a sharp Prada suit that I knew she could not afford. She crossed her arms, her diamond engagement ring catching the morning sunlight pouring through the skylights. Terrence, an imposing African-American man who commanded every courtroom he entered, stood tall and rigid. He was the chief legal counsel for Nexus Corp, and he wielded his legal expertise like a blunt instrument to intimidate anyone who dared question the family. Terrence stepped forward, his polished Italian leather shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. He did not offer a greeting. He slammed a thick, heavily bound stack of legal documents onto the pristine granite kitchen island. The sound was designed to startle me, to establish immediate dominance. Divorce papers and a comprehensive post-nuptial non-disclosure agreement. Terrence dictated, his baritone voice filling the kitchen. He slid a heavy gold pen across the granite toward me. Sign it, take the $50,000 pity settlement Preston is generously offering, and get out of this house before I sue you into absolute oblivion for infidelity and corporate espionage. I looked at the thick stack of papers, then up at Terrence's stern, unyielding face. Infidelity. I asked, my voice calm, betraying none of the adrenaline pulsing through my veins. You have absolutely no proof of infidelity, Terrence, because it never happened. Monica let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Please, Madeline. Preston saw you practically throwing yourself at Elias Vance last night. You are a joke. You embarrassed my brother in front of the most important investors in the country just to get back at him for a harmless little joke. You are lucky Terrence is handling this quietly instead of destroying you in court. I turned my gaze to Preston. He stood slightly behind Terrence, letting his brother-in-law do the heavy lifting. Preston's face was still pale, the arrogance from the gala replaced by a desperate, sweaty anxiety. He needed me gone and he needed me silenced before the IPO audit tomorrow. He was terrified that I would talk to Elias again. You embarrassed yourself, Preston, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. And now you are hiding behind your lawyer because you are terrified of what Elias Vance knows. Preston stepped forward, his hands balled into tight fists. Just sign the damn papers, Madeline. Take the money and disappear. I am done dealing with your pathetic attempts to ruin my life. You are nothing but a failed dropout who leached off my success. Terrence tapped the documents with a thick finger. Page 32 requires your signature. Page 40 requires your initials. I suggest you move quickly. If I have to drag you into a deposition, I will make sure you leave with absolutely nothing. I will freeze your bank accounts. I will drag your name through the mud, and I will ensure you never work in this state again. Sign it now. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice, and I did not shed a single tear. I picked up the heavy gold pen. I saw the immediate flash of relief cross Preston's face. He thought he had won. He thought I was folding under Terrence's intimidation tactics, just like I had folded to every other demand he had made over the last 6 years. I pulled the thick stack of documents toward me. I flipped past the cover page, ignoring Terrence's impatient sigh. I did not flip to page 32. I began reading the contract line by line. What are you doing? Monica snapped, rolling her eyes. It is standard legal boilerplate. You do not even understand half the words in there. Just sign it so we can fumigate the house. I ignored her. I continued flipping the pages, the crisp paper rustling in the quiet kitchen. I reached page 14. My eyes scanned down the dense paragraphs of legal jargon until they locked onto a specific clause buried deep within the asset division section. Clause 4.2. Intellectual property. I stopped flipping. I read the clause twice, ensuring the exact wording was exactly what I anticipated Terrence would draft. I tightened my grip on the gold pen, feeling the cool metal against my skin. Monica shifted her weight impatiently, letting out a heavy, dramatic sigh. She leaned against the pristine marble counter, holding her left hand up to the morning light to admire the multi-carat diamond ring resting on her finger. Her lips curled into a vicious sneer. She looked me up and down, taking in my simple gray slacks and plain white blouse with absolute revulsion. You are pathetic, Madeline. Monica spat, her voice dripping with pure venom. Look at you. You spent 6 years trying to play the role of a billionaire's wife, and you never even figured out how to dress the part. You are a small-town nobody who got lucky because my brother felt sorry for you. Now you are throwing a tantrum because he finally realized you do not belong in our world. Just take your little pity check and go back to whatever miserable life you had before you latched on to him. You are wasting our valuable time. I did not even blink. I did not turn my head to look at Monica. I let her cruel, petty words hit the floor like dead weight. My focus remained entirely locked on the heavy cream-colored paper resting on the granite island. Clause 4.2, I stated. My voice was incredibly calm, cutting through the tense air of the kitchen like a sharpened blade. I kept my eyes on the text projecting absolute authority. Preston shifted uncomfortably on his feet. What about it? He snapped. It is standard. Terrence drafted it himself. Stop stalling. I read the text aloud, ensuring every single syllable echoed clearly in the vast empty room. All intellectual property algorithms, codebases, and digital assets created by either party during the duration of the marriage shall remain the sole and exclusive property of Preston Vance. The signing party hereby waives all rights, claims, and equity regarding Nexus Corp and its subsidiary holdings. I looked up, meeting Terrence's imposing glare. This is a very interesting choice of words, Terrence. Terrence crossed his massive arms over his chest, puffing himself up to his full, intimidating height. It is a bulletproof clause, Madeline. It ensures you cannot crawl back out of the woodwork in 5 years, claiming you deserve a piece of a company you had absolutely nothing to do with. Preston built Nexus Core. You burned toast. Now sign the document. I looked down at the gold pen in my hand. I adjusted my grip, pressing the heavy nib firmly against the thick paper. I did not sign on the dotted line at the bottom of the page. Instead, I dragged the pen forcefully through the center of Clause 4.2. I drew a thick, dark, violent line straight through the paragraph. I crossed out every single word regarding intellectual property algorithm ownership and digital assets. The gold pen scratched loudly against the paper. "What the hell are you doing?" Preston yelled, taking a sudden step forward. I ignored him. I drew a second line, then a third, making an absolute mess of Terrence's perfectly formatted legal trap. Right next to the obliterated paragraph, I quickly scrawled my initials legally, acknowledging the manual alteration of the text. Then and only then did I flip to the final page of the document. I signed my name with a smooth, practiced flourish. I pushed the heavy stack of papers back across the polished granite. It slid smoothly, coming to a halt directly in front of Terrence. "Done," I said softly. Preston looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He grabbed the edge of the kitchen island, his knuckles turning white. "What did you just do to the contract?" he demanded, his voice pitching high with panic. Terrence let out a loud, dismissive scoff. He did not bother picking up the document to closely examine my alteration. He was far too arrogant, far too confident in his own superiority to believe a simple housewife could outmaneuver him. He looked at the bold, messy lines crossing out the middle of page 14 and rolled his eyes in sheer exasperation. "Oh, please," Terrence sneered, shaking his head. "Are we acting like children now? You want to cross out a paragraph and throw a tantrum because your feelings are hurt. Fine, it does not matter. The core asset protection is reinforced in 3 other sections of this document. Your little scribbles mean absolutely nothing in a court of law." Terrence was eager to leave. He had a massive corporate merger to finalize before the public offering tomorrow morning. He viewed me as a nuisance, a fly buzzing around his head that he just wanted to swat away. He pulled a silver fountain pen from the inner pocket of his suit jacket. "Terrence, wait," Preston cautioned, stepping forward. "Let me see what she crossed out." Terrence waved him off aggressively. "Relax, Preston. She is just being petty. We need this executed immediately so the board does not panic about a pending divorce. I am not rewriting a 50-page document because your ex-wife wanted to draw some lines on a page." Without a single moment of hesitation, without reading the specific clause I had destroyed, Terrence flipped to the final page. He hastily scrawled his signature next to mine, officially executing the agreement as the authorized legal representative for Preston and Nexus Core. He initialed the bottom corner, binding the contract under California state law. Terrence tossed his silver pen back into his pocket. He picked up the finalized document and tapped the edges against the granite counter to straighten the pages. "Smart move, taking the cash," Terrence mocked, flashing a cold, predatory smile. $50,000 is a lot more than zero. Buy yourself something nice. Try not to spend it all in one place." Preston let out a massive sigh of relief. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his shoulders dropping as the tension finally left his body. The divorce was finalized. The threat was supposedly neutralized. He turned to me, his face twisting into a mask of pure contempt. "You have 30 minutes to get off my property," Preston ordered. "If you are still here when the security team arrives, they will throw you out physically." I picked up the handle of my single overnight suitcase. I looked at Monica, who was still examining her diamond ring. I looked at Preston, who was already pulling out his phone to call his new assistant. Finally, I looked at Terrence, who was tucking the signed legal documents securely into his leather briefcase. I offered them a polite, entirely serene smile. I turned and walked toward the front door, my heels clicking softly against the marble. Terrence had absolutely no idea what he had just done. In his rush to dismiss me, in his blinding arrogance, he had hastily countersigned an altered contract without reading the changes. He had just legally surrendered Preston's claim to the core algorithm. He had just signed away the entire foundation of Nexus Core. The glass and steel monolith of Nexus Core headquarters dominated the Silicon Valley skyline. Walking through the revolving doors of the main lobby, I felt a strange sense of detachment. A massive digital ticker hung above the reception desk, counting down the hours, minutes, and seconds until tomorrow morning's highly anticipated public offering. The entire building hummed with frantic, arrogant energy. Employees rushed past me holding tablets and financial reports, completely ignoring the woman they all assumed was merely the CEO's technologically illiterate wife. I bypassed the main reception desk and took the private executive elevator to the top floor. The ride was smooth and silent. I watched the floor numbers tick upward, reflecting on how Preston had always forbidden me from visiting the office. He claimed my presence undermined his authority. The truth was, my presence was a walking reminder that he was a fraud who could not compile a basic line of code without asking for my help. The elevator doors chimed and slid open, revealing the expansive marble-floored antechamber of the executive suite. I stepped out holding a small leather tote bag intended for the few personal notebooks and early architectural blueprints I had stored in a back filing cabinet years ago. Before I could even cross the lobby, a sharp clacking sound echoed across the marble. Whitney marched out from behind the massive reception desk, purposefully blocking my path to the hallway. She was wearing a tight designer dress that looked suspiciously like one I had seen on Preston's credit card statement 3 months ago. In her left hand, she held an iced latte. On her face, she wore an expression of supreme, unearned superiority. "What are you doing here?" Whitney demanded, crossing her arms and using her body to physically block the corridor. "Preston specifically told you to leave. He called me 10 minutes ago to say the divorce was signed and you were officially gone." I kept my expression entirely neutral. "I am here to retrieve my personal belongings from the archives. It will take me exactly 5 minutes, Whitney. Move aside." Whitney did not move. Instead, her smug smile widened into a malicious grin. She looked down at my simple clothing, then at the modest leather tote bag in my hand, her eyes filled with open disgust. "You do not belong here anymore, Madeline," Whitney said, her voice echoing loudly enough for the 2 security guards down the hall to hear. "In fact, I am redecorating the CEO suite today, and your cheap aesthetic is ruining my mood." With a flick of her wrist, Whitney tipped her plastic cup forward. The iced latte cascaded through the air, splashing violently across the front of my white blouse and completely drenching my leather tote bag. The brown liquid dripped down the sides of the bag and pooled onto the pristine marble floor, splattering my shoes in the process. "Oops," Whitney mocked, feigning a gasp. "I guess you will just have to leave empty-handed. Security will escort you out. We cannot have trash dirtying up the executive floor right before the IPO." The 2 security guards at the end of the hall chuckled, shifting their weight and preparing to intervene on Whitney's behalf. I stood perfectly still. The icy liquid seeped into the fabric of my blouse, but I did not gasp. I did not yell. I did not give Whitney the dramatic, emotional reaction she was so desperately craving. I slowly pulled a tissue from my pocket, wiped a single drop of coffee from my cheek, and dropped the soiled tissue directly into the puddle on the floor. I looked at Whitney with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a slightly annoying insect. "You are right," I said softly. "My belongings in that office are completely worthless now. Keep them." I stepped right over the puddle of spilled coffee, completely bypassing Whitney. But I did not walk back toward the elevators. I pivoted sharply to the right and walked straight down the eastern corridor. "Hey, Whitney," shouted her voice, pitching up in sudden confusion as she scrambled to follow me. "Where are you going? The exit is the other way." Security grab her. I ignored the heavy footsteps of the guards jogging down the hall behind me. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead on the massive frosted glass doors at the very end of the corridor. It was the master server room. It housed the central mainframe, the proprietary neural network, and the physical manifestation of the Nexus core algorithm. Preston had spent millions fortifying this specific room. It was protected by biometric scanners, heavily encrypted keypads, and a titanium-reinforced locking mechanism. It was the absolute heart of the company. "Madeline, stop right there!" Whitney shrieked, her heels slipping on the marble as she chased me. "You cannot go near that room. Only Preston and the chief technology officer are allowed in there." I reached the frosted glass doors. The biometric scanner glowed an intimidating red, waiting for an authorized presence. Preston genuinely believed he controlled the security of this building. He believed that because he paid the bills and his name was on the lease, he held the keys to the kingdom. He fundamentally misunderstood how digital architecture worked. He forgot that the person who writes the root code always holds the master key. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a plain, unmarked white plastic card. I had carried it in my wallet for 6 years. "Grab her," Whitney yelled at the guards who were now just 10 feet away. Without missing a beat, I pressed the blank white card against the encrypted scanner pad. For a fraction of a second, the machine hesitated. Then a loud mechanical click echoed through the corridor as the heavy titanium bolts retracted. The intimidating red light on the scanner instantly flipped to a brilliant glowing green. The heavy glass doors hissed open, granting me unrestricted access to the multi-billion-dollar servers. Whitney skidded to a halt, her jaw dropping in absolute horror. The security guards froze in their tracks, staring at the green light with wide, uncomprehending eyes. "Close the doors!" Whitney screamed, her voice cracking into absolute panic as the realization finally hit her. "She has God-level access. Get Preston on the phone right now." The heavy magnetic locks of the master server room engaged with a brutal, definitive snap. The LED indicator on the card reader flipped from an inviting green to a harsh, impenetrable red. I stood on the inside of the soundproof, reinforced glass. Preston stood on the outside. His face was completely devoid of color, replaced quickly by a mottled, furious crimson, as the reality of the locked door registered in his mind. He grabbed the handle, yanking it backward with all his body weight, but the titanium mechanism refused to yield a single millimeter. Beside him, Terrence abandoned his usual composed, legal arrogance, slamming his flat palms against the thick pane. 2 uniformed Nexus Core security guards flanked them, swiping their master keycards frantically against the external reader. Every swipe resulted in a loud, rejecting buzz. I turned my back to their panic. The climate-controlled air of the server room was chilled to a precise 58 degrees, a stark contrast to the heat of the betrayal I had endured for years. Row upon row of black server racks towered above me, their thousands of blue and green indicator lights blinking in synchronized harmony. This was the beating heart of Nexus Core. This was the engine that was supposed to make Preston a billionaire when the opening bell rang at the stock exchange tomorrow morning. I walked smoothly to the central administrative console. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and retrieved a sleek matte black USB drive. It was heavily encrypted, custom-built for this exact moment. I inserted it into the master terminal. The primary monitor flared to life, casting a stark white glow across my face. A command prompt appeared demanding root access. My fingers danced across the mechanical keyboard, entering the 50-character alphanumeric passcode that I had memorized months ago. I struck the Enter key. A bright blue progress bar materialized in the center of the screen. Above it, bold white text declared the specific sequence, revoking license protocol. The bar ticked to 12%. "You really thought you owned all of this, Preston?" I muttered, my voice steady and cold, echoing slightly over the low roar of the server cooling fans. "You spent 6 years taking the stage at tech conferences, giving interviews to business magazines, and playing the role of the visionary founder. You called my work a mere contribution. You called me a supporting player while you took the spotlight." Behind me, a dull, heavy thud reverberated through the room. I glanced over my shoulder. One of the security guards had retrieved a red emergency fire axe from the corridor wall and was driving the steel wedge directly into the reinforced glass. A tiny star-shaped fracture appeared near the door handle. I turned back to the monitor. 28%. "But you never wrote a single line of the Genesis framework?" I continued, tracing the edge of the keyboard. "You did not build the predictive algorithms. You did not design the user data compression models that made this entire platform viable. I built them. I coded every foundational element in my tiny apartment before Nexus Core even had a name." The blue bar surged forward, 45%. The rhythmic pounding against the glass grew louder. The star-shaped fracture was expanding into a massive, jagged spiderweb. Preston was screaming something, his face pressed against the glass, the veins in his neck bulging dangerously. I could not hear his exact words through the soundproofing, but the sheer raw panic in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He was watching his multi-billion-dollar empire evaporate in real time. "And Terrence?" I said, a sharp smile touching my lips as I watched the progress bar hit 60%. "The brilliant corporate attorney who thought he could lock me out of my own creation with an airtight post-nuptial agreement. You drafted ironclad clauses to protect Preston's shares. But you were so arrogant, so dismissive of my intellect that you never bothered to audit the origin of the core intellectual property. You just assumed a wife's work automatically belonged to her husband. 75%. The lights on the nearest server rack flickered. The steady, healthy blue LEDs began to flash a warning yellow. The protocol was ripping the foundational code out of the physical hardware, actively severing the neural pathways of Nexus Core. The master algorithm was systematically dismantling its own integration with the company hardware, packing itself tightly into the drive waiting in the port. The Genesis framework was never sold to this company, I stated clearly, watching the yellow lights turn to a dead, lifeless red. It was registered to Aegis Ventures, a holding company I formed 5 years ago. I did not give you my algorithm, Preston. I leased it to you. A standard fixed-term corporate lease. And according to the precise terms of the contract you neglected to read, that lease expires exactly 12 hours before your public offering. 88%. The sound of the axe hitting the door shifted from a dull thud to a sharp, brittle crack. The glass was failing. The magnetic lock was whining in protest as the